The scent of blood was still fresh in the air when Gemma Graves realized she was the only one left breathing. She stood in the ruins of her family's townhouse, surrounded by shattered glass and overturned furniture, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. The police hadn't arrived yet. She had maybe 10 minutes before the sirens would split the night open, before questions she couldn't answer would rain down on her like shrapnel. Her mother, her father, her 2 younger sisters all gone. Not murdered in any conventional sense. Drained, completely and utterly emptied of blood, their bodies left like discarded husks on the living room floor. Gemma had been at work. She'd stayed late at the museum archive cataloging a new acquisition of medieval manuscripts. When she'd come home to this nightmare, her first instinct had been to call 911. Her second instinct, the one whispering in the back of her mind with her grandmother's voice, told her to run. Because the Graves family knew things other families didn't. They remembered things the modern world had chosen to forget. Vampires were real, and her bloodline had been hunting them for over 400 years. Gemma's grandmother had died 3 years ago, taking most of the family's knowledge with her. She'd tried to pass it on, had filled Gemma's childhood with stories that seemed like dark fairy tales, warnings disguised as bedtime stories. But Gemma's parents had wanted a normal life for their children. They'd moved away from the ancestral home in New England, settled in Chicago, tried to pretend the past didn't exist. Now they were dead because of that choice. Gemma heard footsteps on the stairs outside. Too light, too measured, not the police. She dropped her phone and grabbed the only weapon within reach, a fireplace poker, and spun toward the door just as it opened without anyone touching the handle. The man who entered made the air itself seem to hold its breath. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with skin so pale it seemed to luminishi in the dim light. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, not the white of age but of something otherworldly, something that had never known mortal color. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than her car, tailored to perfection, and moved with a grace that made her think of panthers and poetry and predators. His eyes found hers. They were crimson, actual blood-red crimson. "Gemma Graves," he said, and his voice was like velvet dragged over broken glass. "The last daughter of a dying line." She raised the poker with both hands, trying to stop the shaking. "Stay back." Something that might have been amusement flickered across his perfect features. "That will do you no good against me, child. If I meant you harm, you would already be dead, like my family." His expression shifted, became something harder. "I did not kill your family, but I know who did. Why should I believe you?" "Because I am Konstantin Draconis, king of the Night Court, and I have spent the last 3 weeks hunting the rogues who slaughtered your bloodline." He moved closer, and she noticed details now, the way shadows seemed to cling to him, the absolute stillness of his chest because he wasn't breathing, the ancient weight in his gaze that spoke of centuries. "I arrived too late to save them. I will not arrive too late to save you." Gemma's hands were shaking so badly now that the poker rattled. "You're lying. Vampires killed them. You're a vampire." Yes. He didn't deny it, didn't soften it. But not all vampires are the same, just as not all hunters are righteous. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Did your grandmother not teach you about the courts, about the laws that govern my kind?" She had. Late at night, in whispered conversations that her parents had forbidden. The Night Court, the oldest and most powerful of the vampire kingdoms, ruled by ancient laws and older kings. The rogues, the lawless ones who killed indiscriminately and broke every code. The endless war between order and chaos that humans never saw. "The rogues," Gemma whispered. "Why would they target my family specifically?" Konstantin's eyes darkened. "Because your bloodline is special. The Graves family doesn't just hunt vampires, your blood carries something unique. A genetic anomaly that makes it intoxicating to my kind. Addictive. Most of my court has never even heard the scent, but those who have..." He paused. "Wars have been fought over less." The poker slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. "That's insane. That's truth." He gestured to the carnage around them. "The rogues discovered your family's location. They killed everyone they could find, drained them, tasted that blood. Now they'll be hunting for more, hunting for you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. "You need to leave," Konstantin said. "Now. The human authorities cannot protect you from what's coming. I'm not going anywhere with you." But even as she said it, Gemma was thinking about the bodies downstairs, about her sister's empty eyes, about the fact that whatever had killed them could come back at any moment. Konstantin studied her for a long moment, then did something unexpected. He knelt, actually lowered himself to one knee in front of her, his crimson eyes level with hers. "I swear to you on my crown, on my court, on every oath that holds meaning in this world, I will protect you. You are the last of your bloodline, Gemma Graves, and you will never be alone. Not while I draw breath, such as it is. The words hit her like a physical force. There was power in them, something that resonated in her bones, and she realized with a shock that he was offering her a vow. A true vow, the kind her grandmother had said vampires took more seriously than death itself. Why? She asked. Why would you protect me? My family has killed your kind for centuries because the rogues must be stopped, because innocent blood, human or vampire, should not be spilled without consequence, and because he paused, and something complicated crossed his features. Because I knew your grandmother, many years ago. We were not enemies. The sirens were on her street now. Gemma looked at the vampire king kneeling before her, at the ruins of her home, at the life she'd thought she had lying shattered on the floor. She thought about her grandmother's warnings, her mother's desperate attempts at normalcy, her own naive belief that she could ignore her heritage. All of that was gone now. She could stay, try to explain the unexplainable to the police, become a target for things that hunted in the dark. Or she could trust the monster offering his hand. Some choice. If you betray me, she said quietly, I'll find a way to make you regret it. Konstantin's lips curved into the barest suggestion of a smile. I would expect nothing less from a Graves. He stood in one fluid motion and extended his hand. Come, we have very little time. Gemma took his hand. His skin was cold but not unpleasant, like marble that had been kept in shadow. The moment their fingers touched, something sparked between them: recognition, electricity, fate clicking into place. Then the world dissolved into shadow and motion, and they were gone. When reality reformed around her, Gemma found herself standing in a room that looked like it belonged in a European castle. Vaulted ceilings stretched overhead, supported by columns of black marble veined with silver. Chandeliers hung from chains that looked like they'd been forged centuries ago, their crystals catching light that came from no visible source. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting battles and courts and creatures with too many teeth. Where are we? She asked, her voice echoing. Beneath the city, Konstantin replied, releasing her hand. My court exists in the spaces your world forgot: old tunnels, abandoned stations, vaults that predate your modern buildings. We are woven into Chicago's foundations, invisible to mortal eyes. Gemma turned in a slow circle, taking it in. Other figures moved in the shadows beyond the main chamber, all of them with that same ethereal paleness, that same predatory grace. She could feel their attention on her, curious and hungry. They can smell it, can't they? She asked. My blood, yes. Konstantin moved to stand between her and the watching vampires, a clear gesture of protection. But they're bound by my laws. None will touch you. A woman emerged from the shadows, her white hair braided in an intricate crown, her pale skin marked with what looked like ritual scars. She wore a gown of deep burgundy that swept the floor, and her eyes were the same crimson as Konstantin's. So this is the Graves girl, she said, her accent placing her somewhere in Eastern Europe. The last drop of poisoned honey. Careful, Svetlana. Konstantin's voice carried a warning. The woman Svetlana waved a dismissive hand. I mean no offense. Simply stating fact. Her blood would drive lesser vampires to madness. She circled Gemma slowly, assessing. But you claim her under royal protection? I do. The court will talk. Let them. Konstantin's tone suggested the conversation was over. Svetlana smiled, revealing fangs that gleamed in the dim light. As you wish, my king. She looked at Gemma with something that might have been pity. Welcome to the darkness. Little hunter, I hope you survive it. After Svetlana left, Konstantin led Gemma through a series of corridors that twisted deeper into the underground complex. They passed chambers filled with vampires engaged in activities that ranged from the mundane reading, conversing, to the unsettling. In one room she glimpsed what looked like a council meeting. Ancient-looking vampires seated around a table carved from a single piece of obsidian. In another, younger vampires sparred with blades that moved too fast for her eyes to follow. How many of you are there? She asked. In my court? 347 at last count worldwide? Konstantin shrugged. Perhaps 10,000, maybe less. We are not as numerous as your stories suggest in the rogues. Fewer, but more dangerous precisely because they follow no laws, acknowledge no authority. He stopped in front of a heavy wooden door carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. This will be your chamber. You'll be safe here. The wards are keyed to allow only you and me to enter. Gemma pushed open the door and found herself in a suite that was surprisingly comfortable. A large bed dominated one wall, covered in velvet and silk. Bookshelves lined another, filled with volumes that looked ancient. A fireplace crackled with flames that provided warmth but no smoke. Large windows looked out over what appeared to be an underground lake, its surface perfectly still. The windows are an illusion, Konstantin explained. But a pleasant one. I thought you might prefer not to feel buried alive. It was such a small, unexpected kindness that Gemma felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time since she'd found her family, she blinked them back angrily. "Thank you." "Rest," Konstantin said. "Tomorrow we begin planning how to draw out the rogues who killed your family. I want to help." He turned back to her, studying her face. "You're not trained as your ancestors were. Your parents drew from that life then trained me." Gemma stepped closer, meeting his crimson gaze. "You said my blood is valuable, that it makes me a target. Fine. Then make me a weapon instead of just bait." Something like respect flickered in Konstantin's eyes. "You are more like your grandmother than you know. You said you knew her." "How?" "That," he said softly, "is a story for another night." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Lock this behind me. Trust nothing, not even the darkness. And if you need me," he touched his chest over where his heart would have been if it still beat. "Call my name. I will hear you." Then he was gone, the door closing silently behind him. Gemma locked it as instructed, then sagged against the wood, letting the weight of the day finally crash over her. Her family was dead. She was trapped in an underground vampire kingdom, and she'd just agreed to let the vampire king train her to fight the monsters who'd destroyed everything she loved. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But underneath the fear, something else was stirring. Anger, purpose, and a strange, unsettling awareness of the way her skin had tingled when Konstantin touched her, the way his voice had resonated in her chest when he'd sworn his vow. Gemma pushed away from the door and walked to the illusory window, staring out at the impossible lake. Somewhere up above, the human world was continuing without her. The police would find her family's bodies, would add them to the unsolved murder files, would never know the truth, but she knew, and she would make the ones responsible pay. She just had to trust a vampire king to help her do it. Sleep came eventually, fitful and filled with dreams of white hair and red eyes and shadows that moved with purpose. When Gemma woke, she found clothes laid out on a chair near the bed, practical things. Dark jeans and a fitted black shirt, boots that looked like they'd actually fit her. A note in elegant handwriting sat on top of them. "Training begins at dusk. Wear these." She dressed quickly, surprised that everything fit perfectly, then braided her dark hair back from her face. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Her green eyes looked harder than they had yesterday. Older, a knock at the door made her jump. "It's Svetlana," the vampire woman's accented voice called. "The king sent me to escort you." Gemma opened the door cautiously. Svetlana stood in the corridor, now dressed in fitted black clothing similar to Gemma's own, her white hair loose around her shoulders. "Come," Svetlana said. "We have much to teach you and little time to do it. I thought Konstantin was training me. He will teach you strategy, politics, how to think like one of us. I will teach you how to kill us." Svetlana's smile was sharp. "I am the court's weapons master. If you wish to survive, you will learn to do exactly as I say." They walked through the underground complex, and Gemma noticed more details now. The architecture was a mix of styles spanning centuries, medieval stonework blending into Victorian elegance, then into something more modern. The vampires they passed were all beautiful in that unsettling, otherworldly way, but each was distinct. Some wore modern clothing. Others seemed to prefer styles from earlier eras. All of them tracked Gemma's movement with hungry eyes. "They won't hurt you," Svetlana said, noticing her nervousness, "but they will always hunger. That is the curse of our existence. We are forever wanting what we cannot have, craving what is forbidden. My blood is forbidden. Royal protection makes it so. Break that law, and Konstantin would destroy them. Our king is ancient and powerful, and his justice is absolute." They reached a vast chamber that looked like a training ground. Weapons lined the walls, not just swords and stakes, but things Gemma didn't recognize, devices that looked both ancient and deadly. A sparring circle dominated the center, its floor marked with symbols similar to those on her door. Konstantin was already there, along with two other vampires, a man with white hair cropped short and scars crossing his pale face, and a younger-looking vampire woman who watched Gemma with open curiosity. "Good," Konstantin said as they approached. "Gemma Graves, meet Theron and Isolde. They will assist in your training." Theron, the scarred vampire, inclined his head. "Hunter blood in our court. Never thought I'd see the day." "Times change," Konstantin replied. "We change with them or we die. Even immortals are not exempt from evolution." For the next several hours they put Gemma through her paces. Svetlana taught her the weak points in a vampire's body, the heart, obviously, but also the spine, the major arteries that might not carry blood but still mattered. Theron showed her how to move, how to use her smaller size and human warmth as advantages rather than weaknesses. Isolde, surprisingly gentle despite being a vampire, helped her understand how vampires thought, how they hunted, what drove them. And Konstantin watched it all, occasionally offering corrections, his crimson eyes missing nothing. By the time they stopped, Gemma was exhausted, drenched in sweat, her muscles screaming. She'd been knocked down more times than she could count, had failed to land a single solid blow on any of her supernatural trainers. Pathetic, Svetlana declared. But there was something almost fond in her tone. But you kept getting up, that counts for something. She has her grandmother's spirit, Konstantin said quietly. He approached Gemma, offering her a towel. Well done. For a first day, I didn't hit any of you even once, Gemma panted. You survived. Against our kind, that is victory enough. He gestured for the others to leave, and they obeyed without question, though Gemma caught Isolde grinning at her as she departed. When they were alone, Konstantin said, "Walk with me." They left the training chamber and wandered through the underground kingdom. Konstantin led her to a library that took Gemma's breath away, shelves stretching up into shadows, filled with books and scrolls and manuscripts from every era imaginable. "This is beautiful," she whispered. "Knowledge is the true immortality," Konstantin replied. "Empires fall, kingdoms crumble, even vampires can be destroyed. But information, preserved and passed down, endures." He pulled a book from a shelf with unerring accuracy and handed it to her. It was a journal, the leather cover worn with age. Gemma opened it carefully and felt her heart stop. She recognized the handwriting, her grandmother's. "How do you have this?" she demanded. Konstantin settled into a chair, gestured for her to sit across from him. "Your grandmother and I met 70 years ago. She was hunting a rogue who had killed in my territory. We both wanted the same thing, justice, so we worked together." Gemma stared at him. "My grandmother hunted with a vampire? She hunted with me, and in the process we became." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Friends is perhaps too simple a word. Allies with mutual respect." She understood that not all vampires are monsters, just as I understood that not all hunters are zealots. We corresponded for years after. She sent me her journals, asked me to preserve them should anything happen to her family. She knew. Gemma breathed. She knew something might happen to us. She feared it. The rogues have been growing bolder in recent decades. Your grandmother tried to warn your parents, but they wouldn't listen. They wanted the normal life she'd never had. Konstantin's expression was distant. "She made me promise that if the worst happened I would protect any survivors. She was quite specific. I was to find you, keep you safe, teach you the truth she'd never had time to fully share." Tears blurred Gemma's vision. "She asked you to protect me? Specifically me? She said you were special, that you had the gift." He leaned forward. "Can you feel them, Gemma? The vampires around you? Not just see them, but sense them." Gemma thought about the prickling awareness she'd had since entering the court, the way she could almost taste the presence of vampires nearby, like electricity on her tongue. She'd thought it was just fear. "It's more than fear," Konstantin said, as if reading her thoughts. "Your bloodline carries sensitivity to supernatural presence. It made your ancestors formidable hunters. Combined with your blood's unique properties, it makes you—" He trailed off. "What dangerous to us and precious, a terrible combination." The weight of his words settled over her. "The rogues won't stop hunting me. No. Which is why we must draw them out, end them before they can gather more strength." Konstantin stood, paced to the window. "They killed your family to taste your bloodline, but also to send a message. They're challenging my authority, testing whether I'll protect a human hunter in my own court. So I'm bait after all. You're the opportunity to set a trap." He turned back to her. "But only if you agree. I will not use you without your consent, Gemma. That is not how I rule." Gemma clutched her grandmother's journal to her chest, thinking of her family's bodies, of her sisters who'd never had a chance to run. "When? Soon. We need you trained enough to defend yourself when the moment comes. A week, perhaps 2. Konstantin moved closer. "I will be with you every moment. You will not face them alone." "You keep saying that I'll never be alone. Why does that matter so much to you?" His expression shifted, became something raw. "Because I have lived for 800 years, Gemma. I have seen empires rise and fall, watched countless mortals live and die. And in all that time, do you know what the true curse of immortality is?" She shook her head. "Loneliness. The endless, crushing weight of watching everything you care about turn to dust while you remain." He reached out, almost touched her face, then seemed to think better of it. "Your grandmother understood that. She once told me that the worst fate she could imagine was to be the last of her line, alone in a world that had forgotten her family's purpose. I swore to her that if that day ever came, I would not let it happen, that her granddaughter would be protected, honored, never abandoned to face the darkness alone." Gemma's breath caught. "You cared about her." "I did. As a friend, a fellow warrior, she was remarkable." His crimson eyes held Gemma's. "And you are her legacy, the last Graves. I will not fail her by failing you." The intensity in his voice, in his gaze, made Gemma's heart race. She should be afraid of him, should remember that he was a predator and she was prey. But all she could feel was the sincerity of his vow, the lonely ache in his words that resonated with her own grief. "Okay," she said softly. "We set the trap, we end this." Konstantin inclined his head, a gesture of respect that looked natural on him. "Then we begin in earnest tomorrow. For tonight, read your grandmother's words. Learn what she wanted you to know." He left her there in the library, surrounded by centuries of knowledge and her family's legacy. Gemma opened the journal and began to read by the light of impossible candles, discovering a grandmother she'd never fully known, a warrior, a scholar, a woman who danced on the edge between the human and supernatural worlds with deadly grace. And on the final page, dated just 3 months before her death, she found a note that made her heart stop. "If you're reading this, my darling Gemma, then I am gone and Konstantin has found you. Trust him. I know it seems impossible, but he is honorable in ways few humans ever achieve. He will protect you, train you, keep you safe. And perhaps, if I read the currents of fate correctly, he will be something more to you than just a guardian. The heart wants what it wants, even when it shouldn't. Especially then. Be brave, little one. Be strong. And remember, the Graves family fights for balance, not extinction. There are monsters worth destroying and creatures worth saving. Learn to tell the difference. Love always, Gran." Gemma read the words 3 times, her grandmother's voice clear in her mind. The implication was staggering. Had her grandmother suspected that she and Konstantin might, become friends? Something more? That was insane. He was a vampire, she was human. He was 800 years old, she was 23. He was a king, and she was the last broken branch of a dying family tree. But when she closed her eyes, she saw his face when he'd sworn his vow, heard the ache in his voice when he'd spoken of loneliness, remembered the way her skin had tingled at his touch. No, she was just confused, traumatized, grasping at the first anchor in a storm. That's all this was. She repeated that to herself all the way back to her chamber, and tried very hard to believe it. The next week passed in a blur of training and learning. Gemma's body adapted faster than she'd expected. Maybe her bloodline really did carry some advantage. Or maybe desperation was a powerful teacher. She could hold her own in sparring matches now, at least for a few minutes. She'd learned to move through the court without being detected by most vampires, to mask her scent with herbs Svetlana provided, to strike fast and precise. But more than the physical training, she was learning the politics. Konstantin spent hours with her in his study, teaching her about the court structure, the laws that governed vampire society, the delicate balance that kept rogues from overwhelming the world. "We are predators," he explained one evening. Maps of the city spread between them. "But intelligent predators understand sustainability. Kill all the prey and you starve. My kind learned that lesson centuries ago. The courts exist to enforce population control, to punish those who kill indiscriminately, to maintain the veil that keeps humans unaware of our existence. But the rogues don't care about that. No, they want to return to the old ways when vampires hunted openly, when entire villages would be drained dry. They see the courts as weakness, our laws as chains." Konstantin pointed to markers on the map indicating recent rogue activity. "They're gathering strength, recruiting the young and angry. Your family's deaths were meant to be a declaration of war." "Then let's give them one," Gemma said. Konstantin smiled, and it was a predator's smile. Soon, as the days passed, Gemma found herself spending more and more time with the Vampire King. Sometimes they trained, sometimes they planned, but increasingly they just talked. She told him about her life before her job at the museum, her friends who she couldn't contact now, her dreams of travel she'd never pursue. He shared stories of centuries past, of empires and wars and changes that had reshaped the world, and somewhere in those conversations, the distance between them began to shrink. It started small. Konstantin would touch her shoulder when correcting her stance during training, and the touch would linger a moment too long. Gemma would catch herself staring at his profile when he was deep in thought, admiring the elegant lines of his face. Their eyes would meet across a room and hold, something electric passing between them. Svetlana noticed, of course. She cornered Gemma one afternoon in the training room. "You play a dangerous game, little hunter," the vampire woman said. "I don't know what you mean. Don't insult my intelligence. The way you look at him, the way he looks at you." Svetlana's expression was serious. "Konstantin is my king and my friend. I have served him for 300 years. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Gemma's heart raced. "He's just protecting me, like he promised my grandmother. Is that what you tell yourself?" Svetlana moved closer, her voice dropping. "I do not judge, but understand what you risk. The court is watching. Some see you as a curiosity, others as a threat. If it becomes known that the king has feelings for a human hunter, one whose blood could drive vampires mad. She shook her head. There will be consequences. I haven't done anything wrong. Not yet. But the heart is not logical and it does not care about politics or species or the laws that bind us. Svetlana's eyes were sad. I tell you this not as a warning to stop, but as advice to be careful. Very careful. That night Gemma couldn't sleep. She paced her chamber, Svetlana's words echoing in her mind. Finally, she did something foolish. She called his name. Konstantin. Barely a whisper, but within seconds, shadow coalesced in her room and he was there, tension in every line of his body. What's wrong? Are you hurt? No, She trailed off, suddenly aware of how she must look barefoot in sleep clothes, hair loose, probably wild-eyed. I couldn't sleep. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. You called. I came. That is how this works. He relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained sharp, assessing. What troubles you? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. Gemma wrapped her arms around herself. A week ago my family was alive. Now I'm living underground with vampires, training to fight monsters, and She stopped, confused. About all of this. About you. Constant went very still. Me. Gemma forced herself to meet his eyes. You vowed to protect me. But sometimes, when you look at me, it feels like more than duty. And I don't know if I'm imagining that because I'm traumatized and clinging to the first person who's offered me safety, or if, she took a breath, or if it's real. For a long moment Konstantin didn't move, didn't speak. Then, slowly he crossed the room to stand before her, close enough that she could see the fine detail of his pale skin, the way his white hair caught the light, the ancient weight in his crimson eyes. You are not imagining it, he said quietly. From the moment I saw you standing in that ruined house, poker in hand, terrified but defiant, I felt something shift. I told myself it was just the vow to your grandmother, just duty and honor. But I have lived too long to lie to myself about what I feel. Gemma's breath caught. What do you feel? Something I have not felt in centuries, something I thought myself incapable of anymore. He reached up, cupped her face with one cold hand. I am drawn to you, Gemma Graves. Your courage, your strength, the fire in you that refuses to break even when everything around you is shattered. You make me remember what it was like to be human, to feel hope and desire and all the messy, complicated things I thought I'd left behind with my mortality. She should step back. This was insane. He was a vampire king, a creature that fed on blood, that had lived for 800 years. They had no future, no possibility of anything real. But she didn't step back. Instead, she leaned into his touch. I keep telling myself this is just trauma, she whispered. That I'm latching on to you because everything else in my life has been destroyed. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels, she searched for words, like recognition, like some part of me has been waiting for you. Konstantin's eyes darkened. Do you know what your blood smells like to me? She shook her head. Like summer storms and wild honey. Like everything I've denied myself for centuries because wanting leads to weakness. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I could never taste you. Never. The risk is too great. Your blood would be my undoing. But gods, Gemma, I want to. I want things I have no right to want. What things? Instead of answering, he leaned down and kissed her. His lips were cold but not unpleasant, gentle despite the strength she knew he possessed. The kiss was careful, controlled, a vampire king holding back the full weight of his nature. But underneath that control, Gemma felt the hunger, the longing, the desperate want of something that had been alone too long. She kissed him back, her hands finding his shoulders, and felt him shudder. The kiss deepened, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just this, the impossible connection between predator and prey, human and vampire, two lonely souls finding each other in the dark. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, or at least Gemma was, Konstantin rested his forehead against hers. This is dangerous, he said, for both of us. I know your blood calls to me. My nature calls for me to take it. The court will see you as a weakness. The rogues will try to use you against me. I know, and you still want this. Gemma pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. My grandmother wrote that the heart wants what it wants, even when it shouldn't. Especially then. I think she knew this might happen. Your grandmother was a romantic beneath all that warrior steel, Konstantin said, but there was fondness in his voice. Very well, we will navigate this together, carefully. The trap for the rogues comes first once you're safe. Once that threat is ended, then we can, he paused, then we can explore what this is between us. Promise? I vow it. And this time when he said those words, they resonated with the same power as his first oath. You will never be alone, Gemma Graves. Not in protection, not in danger, and not in whatever this becomes. He kissed her once more, soft and sweet, then dissolved into shadow and was gone. Gemma touched her lips, still feeling the cold press of his kiss, and wondered what her grandmother would think of this impossible thing growing between them. Then she remembered the knowing tone in that final journal entry, and suspected her grandmother had known exactly what she was doing when she'd sent Gemma to Konstantin. The old woman had been matchmaking from beyond the grave. Despite everything, Gemma smiled. 2 days later, the trap was set. Konstantin had spread rumors through the vampire underground. The Graves girl was being presented to the court, a formal ceremony where she would be officially recognized under royal protection. It was a public challenge to the rogues. Come and try to take her. Gemma stood in her chamber, dressed in a gown that Isolde had helped her choose. It was deep emerald green, the color of her eyes, fitted through the bodice and flowing from the waist. Elegant but practical, she could fight in it if needed. Her dark hair was swept up, and at her throat she wore a pendant that Konstantin had given her, a silver medallion marked with the Night Court's symbol. "You look like a queen," Isolde said, adjusting the pendant. The young vampire had become something like a friend over the past week. "Konstantin won't be able to take his eyes off you. That's not the point of tonight, isn't it?" Isolde's smile was knowing. "The entire court has been talking about how the king looks at you. This ceremony is about more than just protection, Gemma. It's a declaration." Before Gemma could respond, Svetlana entered. The weapons master wore formal attire as well, a gown of midnight blue, but Gemma could see the blades hidden in its folds. "Ready?" Svetlana asked. "As I'll ever be." They escorted her through the underground complex to the grand hall she'd glimpsed on her first night. But now it was transformed. Hundreds of candles burned in the chandeliers, casting dancing shadows across the gathered vampires. The entire court was present, 347 pairs of crimson eyes turning to watch as Gemma entered. At the far end of the hall, Konstantin sat on a throne carved from black stone. He wore formal robes that looked like they belonged in a medieval court, layers of black silk and velvet, a crown of silver and obsidian on his white hair. He looked every inch the ancient king, powerful and remote, until his eyes found Gemma. Then the remoteness cracked, and she saw heat there, possessiveness, and something that might have been pride. Svetlana guided her down the center of the hall, vampires parting before them. Gemma kept her head high, refusing to show fear even as she felt the weight of all that hunger directed at her. Her blood was singing to them, calling, and only Konstantin's authority kept them from answering that call. When she reached the throne, Konstantin rose. The hall fell silent. "I present to you Gemma Graves," his voice rang out, carrying to every corner of the vast space. "Last daughter of a line that has walked between worlds for 400 years. She comes to us seeking justice for her murdered family, and I have granted her the protection of the Night Court." Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Gemma caught fragments. "Hunter blood, dangerous, the king's pet human." Konstantin raised a hand and silence fell again. "Let it be known throughout every court, every territory, every shadow where our kind dwells, Gemma Graves is under my personal protection. Any who harm her answer to me. Any who threaten her will face my justice. She is mine to guard, mine to defend. Let the rogues who slaughtered her family hear this and know their time is short." He descended from the throne and offered Gemma his hand. She took it, and together they turned to face the court. "Let any who would dispute my claim step forward now," Konstantin said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of authority. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the windows exploded inward. Vampires poured through the shattered glass rogues, their eyes wild, their movements feral. They were dressed in ragged clothes, their white skin smeared with dirt and dried blood, and they moved with none of the grace of the court vampires. These were creatures that had given themselves over entirely to the hunger. Gemma counted at least 20 of them before chaos erupted. The court vampires moved to defend their hall, and suddenly the grand chamber was a battlefield. Svetlana materialized next to Gemma, blades in hand. Theron appeared on her other side, his scarred face grim. "Stay close," he growled. But Konstantin was already moving, putting himself between Gemma and the attackers. His power filled the air like a storm, and when he raised his hand, shadow itself responded, forming into barriers and weapons. A rogue vampire broke through the defenses, heading straight for Gemma. She saw her family's killer in his eyes, the same mindless hunger, the same disregard for life. Rage filled her, hot and clean. She'd been training for this. Gemma dodged his lunge, moved the way Svetlana had taught her, and drove a silver blade up under his ribs. The rogue screamed and dissolved into ash, her first kill. She'd expected to feel something: horror, regret, but all she felt was grim satisfaction. "Good," Svetlana said approvingly, already engaging another rogue. "Channel that anger." The battle raged around them. Court vampires fought with discipline and skill, while the rogues attacked with wild ferocity. Blood, vampire blood, which ran black, splattered the marble floors. The ancient hall echoed with screams and the clash of weapons. And through it all, Konstantin was magnificent. He moved like death itself, destroying rogues with casual efficiency. Shadow bent to his will, forming blades and shields and chains. No one touched him. Nothing could. But then Gemma saw him the leader. She knew him instantly. He was taller than the other rogues, his white hair long and matted, his crimson eyes focused with an intelligence the others lacked. And he was moving toward Konstantin's exposed back while the king was engaged with 3 other attackers. "Konstantin!" Gemma screamed. He turned, but not fast enough. The rogue leader's blade, a wicked thing made of bone, drove into Konstantin's shoulder. The vampire king staggered, black blood blooming across his robes. Something in Gemma snapped. She didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. She crossed the distance between them in seconds, her blade finding the rogue leader's side. He turned on her with a snarl and she saw recognition in his eyes. "The Graves girl," he hissed. "Your blood will make me a god." "My blood will kill you," Gemma replied and struck again. This time Konstantin was there, recovered enough to fight beside her. Together they moved in perfect synchronization, her strikes forcing the rogue to dodge into Konstantin's killing blows. His power hurting the enemy toward her blade. The rogue leader was strong, fast, but he was no match for a vampire king and a hunter's descendant working together. When Konstantin's hand finally closed around his throat, the rogue's eyes went wide. "You killed her family," Konstantin said, his voice colder than Gemma had ever heard it. "You slaughtered innocents. You challenged my court. You threatened what is mine." "The old laws are dead," the rogue gasped. "We will be free. You will be dust." Konstantin tore out his throat and the rogue leader dissolved into ash. The remaining rogues, seeing their leader destroyed, tried to flee. They didn't make it far. The court vampires hunted them down with ruthless efficiency. Within minutes, the battle was over. Gemma stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, covered in ash and blood. Around her, the court was stirring, assessing damage. Several vampires had been wounded, but none fatally. The rogues hadn't stood a chance against organized, disciplined opposition. Konstantin approached her, pressing a hand to his injured shoulder. "You saved me. You were protecting me. Someone had to return the favor." He smiled and it transformed his face. "We make a formidable team. The king and his hunter," Svetlana said, approaching them. She was splattered with black blood but uninjured. "The court will talk about this for decades." "Let them talk," Konstantin replied. He addressed the assembled vampires. "Let this be a lesson to all. The night court does not fall to rogues. We do not abandon those under our protection, and we do not forgive those who spill innocent blood." His eyes swept across the room. "Spread the word. The rogues who killed the Graves family are no more. Justice is done." A cheer went up from the court vampires. Gemma felt the weight of their gazes on her, but it was different now. Not just hunger, respect, acceptance. Later, after the hall had been cleared and the wounded tended to, Gemma found herself in Konstantin's private chambers. She'd insisted on helping him clean and bandage his wound, even though he protested that it would heal on its own. "Humor me," she'd said, and he'd relented. Now she sat beside him on a couch that probably cost more than her car, carefully wrapping clean linen around his shoulder. The wound was already closing. Vampire healing was remarkable, but she needed something to do with her hands. "It's done," she said quietly. "The ones who killed my family are gone. Yes, I should feel more satisfaction, closure, something." Konstantin caught her hand, stilling her movements. "You feel what you feel. Revenge rarely brings the peace we hope for. But you fought bravely tonight, Gemma. Your family would be proud." She looked up at him, this ancient vampire king who'd become so much more than just her protector. "What happens now?" Konstantin's thumb brushed across her knuckles. "Now you choose. The threat is ended. You're safe. You can return to the human world if you wish. Try to rebuild the life you had before. I won't stop you." "You wouldn't?" "I said I would protect you, not cage you. If you want to leave, I will ensure you have the resources and safety to do so." His crimson eyes were serious. "But I hope you stay." Gemma's heart raced. "Why?" "Because in 800 years I have never met anyone like you. Because you make me feel alive again. Because when I told you that you would never be alone, I meant it, and perhaps I meant it for both of us." He cupped her face with his free hand. "Stay with me, Gemma. Not as a duty or obligation. Stay because you want to. Let me show you the world as I see it. Teach you everything your grandmother never had time to share. Let us see what this thing between us can become. I'm human, you're immortal. Eventually I'll age and die, and you'll still be here, I know. And I will cherish every moment we have, however long that may be. Is that not better than never having those moments at all?" Gemma thought about her family, about the life she'd lost, about the future that had been torn away from her. But she also thought about the past week, the training, the learning, the sense of purpose she'd found in this underground world. And she thought about Konstantin, about the way he looked at her, about the connection that had formed between them so quickly it should have been impossible. Maybe it was impossible. Maybe this was insane, but her grandmother had trusted him, had sent her to him knowing exactly what might happen. And in her journal, she'd written about being brave, about fighting for balance, about learning to tell the difference between monsters worth destroying and creatures worth saving. Konstantin was worth saving, worth choosing, worth whatever time they had together. "I'll stay," Gemma said, "but I have conditions." Interest flickered in his eyes. "Name them." "I want to continue training. I want to be more than just a protected human in your court. I want to be a bridge between worlds, the way my grandmother was. I want to help maintain the balance." Agreed. "What else?" "I want access to all my grandmother's journals, all the knowledge the Graves family accumulated. If I'm the last of my line, then I need to preserve that legacy. You'll have access to everything in my library. Anything else?" Gemma took a breath. "I want honesty. No matter how long we have together, however this ends, I want truth between us, no secrets." Konstantin smiled. "That I can promise." He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. "Any more conditions?" "Just one." "Yes, kiss me again." He did. And this time there was no hesitation, no holding back. The kiss was deep and claiming, and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, Konstantin pulled her close, and Gemma let herself lean into his cold embrace. "Tell me about her," she said. "About my grandmother. About how you met." And there, in the quiet of his chambers, Konstantin began to speak. He told her about a young hunter who'd been fierce and brilliant, who'd tracked a rogue to his territory and demanded his help. He spoke of battles fought together, of arguments and laughter, of an unlikely friendship that had spanned decades. He described the letters they'd exchanged, the knowledge they'd shared, the mutual respect that had grown between vampire and hunter. "She told me once that she wished I could meet you," Konstantin said. "That you had her gift, but also something more: compassion, empathy. She said you would be the one to truly bridge the worlds if given the chance." "She set this up," Gemma said, wonder in her voice. "She knew what would happen if I came to you. Your grandmother was very wise and very sneaky." Konstantin pressed a kiss to Gemma's temple. "But I find I cannot fault her methods. They stayed like that for a long time, finding comfort in each other's presence." Eventually, Gemma felt exhaustion creeping over her, the adrenaline from the battle finally wearing off. "Sleep," Konstantin murmured. "I'll watch over you." "You don't have to, I know, but I want to." She was too tired to argue. Gemma let him carry her to his bed, an enormous thing draped in silk, and lay down fully clothed. Konstantin settled beside her, one arm draped over her waist, protective even in rest. As she drifted off, Gemma thought about how strange her life had become. A week ago, she'd been a museum archivist with normal problems and normal dreams. Now she was the last of a hunter bloodline, protected by a vampire king, living in an underground court and falling in love with something that should have been her enemy. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt like coming home. In the days that followed, Gemma settled into her new life. She trained with Svetlana every morning, learning not just how to fight but how to move through the vampire world safely. She spent afternoons in the library, reading her grandmother's journals and learning the accumulated knowledge of 400 years of hunting. And she spent evenings with Konstantin, sometimes discussing court business, sometimes simply talking, always growing closer. The court vampires grew accustomed to her presence. Some, like Isolde and Theron, became genuine friends. Others remained wary but respectful. All of them recognized that she was important to their king, and that was enough to ensure her safety. Gemma also began to serve as a liaison between the court and the human world above. Konstantin had been right. She had a gift for diplomacy, for seeing both sides of conflicts, for finding solutions that honored both vampire law and human concerns. When rogues threatened human populations, she helped coordinate responses. When young vampires struggled to adapt to the modern world, she offered guidance. She was becoming exactly what her grandmother had envisioned: a bridge between worlds. And through it all, her relationship with Konstantin deepened. They were careful in public, maintaining appropriate boundaries, but in private they were simply themselves. He showed her the wonders of the vampire world: underground cities that stretched beneath major metropolises, ancient strongholds hidden in plain sight, the beauty and terror of a culture that had existed for millennia. She showed him the human world he'd distanced himself from: art and music and literature from recent decades, the ways humanity was changing and growing. They learned each other's languages, both literally and figuratively. Konstantin taught her the old tongues he spoke, the formal courtesies of vampire society. Gemma taught him to understand modern technology, to navigate the contemporary world he found so bewildering, and they fell in love. Slowly, carefully, but inevitably. 3 months after the battle with the rogues, Konstantin took Gemma to the surface for the first time since she'd come to the court. They emerged in a private garden attached to what looked like an old estate, but was actually one of the court's surface holdings. "I wanted to show you the stars," Konstantin explained. "You've been underground for so long." They lay together on the grass looking up at the night sky. Konstantin could come out at night safely. It was only sunlight that was deadly to vampires. In the darkness, he was as free as she was. "Do you miss it?" Gemma asked, "being able to see the sun sometimes." "But I've had 800 years to make peace with that loss." He turned to look at her. "Besides, I've found I prefer the night now. It brought you to me." She rolled to face him, close enough to see the stars reflected in his crimson eyes. "If you could change it, would you? Would you choose to be human again?" Konstantin considered this seriously. "Once, perhaps. In the early years when I still remembered what it was like to feel warm, to taste food, to have a heartbeat. But now?" He brushed a strand of dark hair from her face. "I am what I am. I've built a kingdom, protected countless innocents, seen wonders and horrors beyond imagination. I cannot regret the path that led me here, to you, even knowing that I'll age and you won't, that eventually you'll lose me. Even knowing that." His expression was fierce. "I would rather have 50 years with you than an eternity without knowing you existed. That is my choice, Gemma, to love you for however long we're given." She kissed him then under the stars and felt the truth of his words. This was impossible and perfect and exactly right. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I know it's fast, I know it's insane, but I do." "I love you too," Konstantin replied. "I have from the moment you raised that fireplace poker and told me to stay back, my fierce, brave hunter." They stayed in the garden until dawn threatened, then returned to the underground kingdom that had become Gemma's home. 6 months later, the court held another ceremony. But this one was different. Gemma stood before Konstantin's throne again, but now she wore a gown of midnight blue edged in silver. Her dark hair was crowned with a circlet of white gold. The pendant at her throat was no longer just the court symbol, it was a betrothal mark, recognized by every vampire present. Konstantin descended from his throne, and this time when he took her hand it was not as king and protected human, but as equals choosing each other. "Gemma Graves," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "You came to us broken and alone, the last of a bloodline that had hunted my kind for centuries. You could have chosen revenge. Instead, you chose understanding. You could have chosen hatred. Instead, you chose love. You have become a bridge between our worlds, a voice for balance and justice, and you have given me something I thought lost forever, hope." He knelt before her, and the entire court went silent. A vampire king kneeling to a human was unprecedented. "Will you stand beside me?" Konstantin asked. "Not as my subject, not as someone under my protection, but as my partner. Will you help me rule this court with wisdom and compassion? Will you let me love you for all the years we're given?" Gemma's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. "Yes." The court erupted in cheers, not all of them entirely approving, but respectful nonetheless. This was their king's choice, and he had proven his judgment sound. Svetlana stepped forward, carrying a cushion that held 2 rings. One was silver set with a blood-red ruby, a traditional vampire betrothal ring, sized for Gemma. The other was a simple band of white gold, engraved with symbols that represented her family's legacy. Konstantin slipped the silver ring onto Gemma's finger. She took the white gold band and placed it on his hand, a human gesture he'd asked her to include in the ceremony. "You are mine," he said softly, "for her ears alone, and I am yours, never alone again, never alone." She agreed. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. Vampires from other courts came to pay their respects and judge this unprecedented union. Most left satisfied that Konstantin had not lost his mind, that the Graves girl was indeed extraordinary, that perhaps this bridge between human and vampire worlds was exactly what was needed in changing times. And through it all, Gemma felt her grandmother's presence like a blessing. The old woman had known, had planned this, had sent her granddaughter to the one being in all the world who would not just protect her, but truly see her, love her, choose her. The Graves family had always fought for balance. Now Gemma was living it. Years passed. Gemma continued to age slowly, perhaps a bit more slowly than normal humans, but still mortal. She and Konstantin discussed the possibility of turning her, making her vampire so they could have eternity together. But in the end, Gemma chose to remain human. "I want to experience this life fully," she explained, "to age and change and eventually die as my kind is meant to. And I want you to remember that, to remember what it means to be mortal, to cherish finite time. That's what I can give you that no one else can." Konstantin agreed, though she knew it cost him. But he honored her choice, loved her through every year, treasured every moment they had together. Gemma became a legend in both vampire and hunter communities. She established formal channels between the courts and the few remaining hunter families, creating alliances instead of endless war. She helped modernize vampire society, pushing for reforms that balanced ancient traditions with contemporary needs. And she preserved her family's legacy, ensuring that future generations would know the Graves' name meant bridge builder, not just vampire slayer. She and Konstantin ruled the Night Court together, he with ancient wisdom and power, she with compassion and innovative thinking. They were formidable partners, their love story becoming the kind of legend that people would tell for generations. On Gemma's 50th birthday, they returned to the surface garden, where Konstantin had first told her he loved her. She was still beautiful, her dark hair now threaded with silver, her green eyes as bright as ever. He looked exactly as he had the night they met, unchanging, immortal. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Choosing someone who won't last?" Konstantin pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "Never. Not for a single moment. You have given me more in these years than I had in the 800 before we met. You taught me to live again, not just exist. That is worth any pain that comes after. I worry about leaving you alone. You won't. You'll be with me always, in the laws we created, in the bridges we built, in the love we shared." He kissed her forehead. "And I have centuries yet to do the work we started together, to honor your memory by continuing your legacy. You will never truly be gone, my love." They stood together under the stars, vampire and human, king and hunter, two impossible people who had found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful. Gemma lived to be 78, a good long life by human standards. She remained active in court affairs until the very end, her mind sharp even as her body finally began to fail. When she died, it was peacefully in her sleep, with Konstantin holding her hand. The Night Court mourned for a year. Konstantin had her buried in a special tomb beneath the court, marked with both her family's symbols and the Night Court's crest. He visited every day, speaking to her as if she could still hear him, keeping her memory alive, and he kept his promise. For the next 200 years and beyond, Konstantin continued the work they'd started together. He reformed the vampire courts, established lasting peace with the hunter families, created a world where balance truly existed between human and supernatural. He never took another partner. When asked why, he would simply say that he'd had his great love, and that was enough for any lifetime, even an immortal one. But he was not alone. The court he'd built with Gemma thrived, filled with vampires who'd learned her lessons of compassion and balance. The human world above knew a peace with the supernatural it had never known before, thanks to the systems she'd helped create. And in the library that bore her name, her grandmother's journals sat beside her own writings, preserving 400 years of Graves' family wisdom for future generations. She had been the last of her bloodline left alive, and the vampire king had vowed she'd never be alone. He'd kept that vow in life, surrounding her with love and purpose and community, and he kept it in death, ensuring that her legacy lived on, that her impact rippled through both worlds, that she was remembered and honored and loved. Gemma Graves had walked into darkness expecting death. Instead, she'd found life bigger and stranger and more beautiful than she could have imagined. She'd found purpose in bridging worlds that had been enemies for centuries. She'd found family in the most unlikely of places, among creatures she'd been taught to fear. And she'd found love with a vampire king who'd been waiting 800 years for someone exactly like her. The last of her bloodline, yes, but never ever alone. Her story ended, but the world they'd built together continued. In underground courts and surface safe houses, in treaties between hunters and vampires, in the careful balance they'd fought so hard to achieve, Gemma's influence endured. Konstantin ruled on, ancient and powerful, and still carrying the white gold ring she'd placed on his finger centuries ago. And every night, before he began his work, he would stand before her tomb and speak the words that had bound them together. "You were never alone, and neither am I. Not while your love lives in everything I do." In the end, that was the true magic, not vampire powers or hunter abilities or supernatural politics, but the simple, impossible fact that two people from different worlds had chosen each other, had built something lasting, had proved that love could bridge any divide, survive any obstacle, transcend even death itself. The Graves family line might have ended with Gemma, but the legacy she created of balance, understanding, and love between worlds that would continue forever. And in the shadows beneath Chicago, in the heart of the Night Court, a vampire king kept his vow, kept her memory alive, kept loving her through all the endless years, grateful for every moment they'd shared, honoring her choice to remain human, to give him the gift of remembering what it meant to truly live. She was the last of her bloodline left alive, and the vampire king had vowed she'd never be alone. It was a promise kept in life and beyond, in every decision he made, every law he upheld, every bridge he maintained between their worlds. Gemma Graves had died as she'd lived surrounded by love. Purpose firmly established, legacy secured. And though her mortal life had ended, her story continued in the world she'd helped create, in the vampire king who'd loved her, in the impossible dream they'd made real, never alone. Not in life, not in death, not ever. That was the vow. That was the truth. That was the love story that changed two worlds forever.